Well, good morning. Welcome to Coffee with the Pastor. We're going through the book of Acts, and the last part of Acts is concentrated more upon Paul. We've seen his conversion, we've seen his first missionary journey, his second missionary journey, his third missionary journey. Now he's gone to Jerusalem. He has delivered the offering that he's taken, probably, and he has given a report about how God is moving among the Gentiles over in Asia Minor, which would be modern day Turkey, and also in what would be modern day Greece, and Macedonia and Greece. And the apostles are thrilled about that. He's given a report to James, the half brother of Jesus, who's head of the church at Jerusalem, and the elders of the church there. But there was a controversy going between the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians. The Jewish Christians still really held that they needed to go to the temple. The temple was still there at that time. They still needed to do sacrifices. They still needed to eat kosher. They still needed to worship on the Sabbath. And so a lot of the reports that they had gotten back is that Paul was preaching that it wasn't necessary to keep up any of the Jewish customs, that the temple wasn't necessary, and on. So they suggested to Paul that there were some young men in their church who were making a vow, and it would be in Jewish tradition. And it was like, went for 7 days, and they would go cleanse themselves every day, probably at the pool of Siloam, and then would walk over to the temple and offer sacrifice every day during their purification time. And so they asked that Paul go with them, that Paul pay for their sacrifices, that they pay for their offerings for that. And then it's in the middle of that, and then we pick it up in verse 27. When the 7 days were nearly over, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. Now this would probably be Ephesus, could be Galatia, but somewhere in that region. They stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, "Men of Israel, help us. This is the man who teaches all men everywhere against our people and our law and this place." So they go and they grab Paul. I see Paul at the Temple Mount, and it's just more than they could handle. So they grab Paul, and they're yelling to other Jews, "Help us, because this man, he's preaching against this temple, he's preaching against our people, he's preaching against the Torah. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple area and defiled this holy place." Now they have no confirmation that he ever did that. And Luke puts in a little comment here in verse 29 of chapter 21. It says they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with Paul and assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple area, which apparently he had not. Trophimus is somebody, he says he's from Ephesus. He travels with them quite a bit. He also spent some time in Rome. He's mentioned in the list of those in Rome who are ministering. So he's been around. And but the whole city was aroused, and the people came running from all directions, seizing Paul. This would have been the Jewish folks. Maybe even the Jewish Christians involved, I don't know. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple, and immediately the gates were shut. While they were trying to kill him, now get that, they're trying to kill him, news reached the commander of the Roman troops that the whole city of Jerusalem was in an uproar. He at once took some officers and soldiers and ran down to the crowd. When the rioters saw the commander and his soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. So there's quite a commotion, and they're getting everybody mad. They have every intention of killing Paul. They probably have already killed James, and so this isn't new for them. And Paul was part of, having Stephen kill him, so this wasn't new. And if they felt like he was disrespecting the temple and disrespecting the Torah, and so that's just too much for them. But the Roman commander came, and in verse 33 it says the commander came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. Then he asked who he was and what he had done. Some of the crowd shouted one thing and some another, and since the commander could not get at the truth because of the uproar, he ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. When Paul reached the steps, the violence of the mob was so great he had to be carried by the soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Away with him, away with him." And so they're trying to kill Paul. They want Paul dead. And then it's just amazing to me how sometimes mob mentality won't handle the truth. First of all, Paul still must have had some respect for the temple. He was going to the temple, had been going almost every day for 7 days, was cleansing himself in the mikvah, just like the guys that made the vow, was honoring that system, was going and doing sacrifices, probably paying for the sacrifices to be made every day. So he was honoring their customs, but it didn't matter because he had told the Gentiles they didn't have to. And so they're ready to kill him, and they're after him. And we'll pick up the story next week where Paul will address the crowd and give his testimony. And then he's going to be arrested and he's going to be able to go to Rome, and that's how he finally gets to Rome. And we'll read about that next week as we come. It's come to the weekend, and I hope you have a great weekend. And I hope that on Sunday, wherever you're at, you find a church to go to. They have said that church attendance, since COVID, we're only running about 60% of what we were before COVID. I know our church is doing a little better than that, but we've built a new church and attracted a lot of new people. But I'm concerned that the church is going to be weakened after this because, truthfully, Jesus came to establish a church. The church is the kingdom of God here on earth, and it needs to be attended, and it needs to have people there, and people need to get there. So I hope you'll make plans to be in church this Sunday. Blessings upon you, and I'll see you next Monday.